This is the Powered Up Podcast, show 89.
All students are completely different and need different types of instruction. And I think really seeing that and understanding that that's just real. It's really true. All kids are completely different in how they take the instruction on. And I think that was like the biggest thing I've seen.
Welcome to a real-world education with insight and advice from teachers in the game, where current and former educators reveal what truly sets apart the great teachers and what it takes to make a positive impact on students. Whether you're in pre-service learning, new to the game, or a seasoned veteran, this is the show for you. You'll leave feeling inspired to take action because we are powering education by empowering you.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Ken Ehrman, host of the Powered Up Podcast, and I am here with my co-host, Mr. Matt, the Mentor Master Rogers. Matthew, how you doing, man?
So I was just the mentor last time we had this guest on, so I'll take Mentor Master. I hardly feel that way, but I appreciate that.
So we
acknowledgement.
Of course, man. You're doing great with your student teacher. So we do have your student teacher back on. We had him on show 60, and the conversation went a lot longer. Matt and I have been trying really hard to get our shows down to like right at almost the hour marker, and this one definitely exceeded that. So I want to keep this intro short and sweet because we had a great conversation with Anthony, having him back on the show, seeing his growth. So we had our modified exit ticket questions that we used with him in show 60, and we asked him again on show 89. So I'm not going to say you can't add any explanation, but let's not do the typical Matt Rogers where you go off the deep end. 3 words that you would hope your students describe you as a teacher.
I'll steal one, but I won't tell you which one I'm stealing. Joyful, trustworthy, and we'll go with prepared.
Give us a short explanation on one of those.
I thought I wasn't supposed to.
I said just a short one.
I'll go with the prepared because it's not about being prepared for the lesson. One of the things that I love about teaching, what later stages of teaching have brought me, is the idea of threading concepts through subject areas and different areas. So the idea of setting up a situation where we can use very similar examples, if not the same scenario, in math class that we use in ELA, that we use in science, that we use in social studies throughout the day, and interweave the different parts of it is one of the most beautiful things that I find in education when you really have a grasp of it. Hey, that experience we had, or we've done all this research of, or a scenario that you feel like, that weaving where it almost feels like the Hollywood movie, that it all works really well, is through preparation, and maybe that's preparation of just understanding the end result and creatively thinking about how you're going to kind of impart the message to the kids, looking at it from that lens and then applying that to what you're teaching.
Right. So you want my 3 words?
So I would like to predict what your 3 words are.
Okay.
Can I do that? So my 3 words for you are rigid, experience, and love. And to clarify, and I'm sure there's some, similarities, change the term. I think you are unwaveringly but consistently there for your kids, regardless of the scenario, and create experiences that, you will stay up all night long to make the experience worth it for kids, which is why you had such the impact years after for the kids that you have. So how close was I?
Kind of similar themes in what you were saying. So my 3 words that I had were individualized. And what I mean by that is, one, my instructional style in always being very small group, always being individualized, but also actually recently read a card that I found that a student wrote me a couple of years after I had her. And she wrote in there about every individual in the class knew you were there for them. Like I had no favorites, which really stuck to me. So individualized, now I'm blanking on authentic, which plays into the experiences piece that you talked about, authentic lessons, authentic experiences, but also being an authentic person, being real, being honest with them, and being open with them. And then my last word was risk taker. And, being willing to take risks in my relationships with them, being willing to take risks in those lessons and experiences that I was providing with them. I actually had a student classify me one time as being a risk taker, which was pretty cool to hear from their perspective. So pretty good, man. You hit the same themes, just use different words.
I don't know.
Sure.
I imagine there's got to be someone that says something about how you did very little, lazy.
Correct. That's the 4th
word. Some capacity. I don't want to say that you overworked and under paid, but no, it's
for sure.
It's very cool to witness. And I know we'll get into this conversation. I'll let you transition it there, but Anthony Wiggins is with me now. He was with me 3 days last semester, and now he's with me for 15 weeks. And it is a beautiful thing. You'll hear, a totally different Mr. Wiggins, and the transitions of, he walked into a classroom that was beautifully, oriented already. Now he's going into a classroom that we have to set up all those rules, all those expectations. This is the most forgettable part of the year. I'll put it that way. I forget about how challenging and exhausting this time of the year is every single year.
Yeah, it's almost allowed you to reflect and realize that more because you're going through with him. So, yeah, so without any further ado, before we jump right into that, I just want to remind everyone this is going to be one of the last weeks that I remind everyone of this, but I am going to the Teach Better Conference in Akron, Ohio, October 14th and 15th. So I'm presenting there. I will be podcasting live there, which I'm super pumped about. I wish I had the stickers with me, but we just bought some stickers that I plan on giving away. Nice little decals that you can add to your laptops or your iPads. So I'm going to be giving those away there. So if you are interested in joining this unbelievable conference, Teach Better is the network that we're a part of for podcasts that you hear about every week. You can go to www.teachbetterconference.com/register. And if you use the promo code PoweredUp22, you will save $50 off your 2-day registration. So I hope to see you in October. Seriously, check it out. I am amped about this conference. So let's hear from our network reminder, and then let's jump right into that interview with Anthony Wiggins.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. You can find out more at teachbetter.com/podcasts. Now let's get back to the episode.
Mr. Anthony Wiggins, welcome back to the Powered Up Podcast. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. How you guys doing?
We are doing fantastic. So we have Matt Rogers. We have his student teacher back. We recorded with you back on show 60. So it was a long time ago. At that time, you were in your practicum or whatever the exact title is, but you were in Matt's classroom a couple days a week, and he had you involved heavily right from the beginning. So if you want to hear the start of Anthony's journey, definitely go back to show 60. But we want to jump right in here and find out how it's going. You're in the meat of student teaching. You opened the year with Matt. So talk to us about your first day. What do you remember from your first day of school as a teacher?
Well, the first day of school was very exciting. We had an assembly at the end of the day, which I'll definitely express later. But the first day of school was awesome. You got to see the kids' smiles on the face, the new kids, even the kids from last year that we had. It was just awesome. They came, gave me hugs, pounds. It was just the smiles all around the school. It was great. The aura and the energy. Everyone seemed to just want to be back in that building. It was such a family oriented welcome back that you just love to be there. At the end of the day, there was an assembly, and so a couple of teachers had to volunteer. And proud to say I was one of the first one to go up, and we had to do paper airplanes and see who could throw it the farthest. Mine's went the farthest. Don't let anyone else tell you anything different. But it was definitely fun. I had the kids; they were excited, and it was just a great first day, to be honest.
That's awesome. So, Matt, I do want to hear from you about your first day with Anthony, but I just want to highlight about what you said about the assembly. Now, it is out of some teachers' comfort to get on stage like that, and I'm not saying that you have to, but I do want to encourage teachers to think about those opportunities because the kids remember that stuff, and not only your homeroom or your set of students that you have, if you're in a secondary school, the multiple classes that you have, but the kid's not in your classroom. And I think what made me realize this is I was constantly involved in that kind of stuff, running assemblies or being a volunteer, doing goofy things, doing silly things. There was one assembly years ago where me and another teacher were pretending to figure skate throughout the entire gym wearing our socks. I don't remember what the point of it was, but the teachers remember it. They still talk to me about it. And now that I'm out of the building, I see students who are now coming to middle school who I never taught, who were years away from having me as a teacher, that see me, yell my name, come say hi to me, that I honestly don't even know who they are. And I truly believe it's because I was a present body in the school and I was involved in that stuff. And the kids remember that. If you teach older grades, they get more excited to have you when they move up in those grades. If you teach younger grades, your former students are excited to see. So it's just a great thing to be as involved as possible and maybe even step out of that comfort zone a little bit. So kudos to you for doing that. Matt, I'm sure you'll tag on to that, but also talk to us about your first day of school with having Anthony with you.
Absolutely. So I will clarify, he put a valiant effort out there in his paper airplane. I think it was the most impressive display of an paper airplane. It did a perfect loop-de-loop and landed potentially behind where he threw it from, which I think, if you were to ask, that might have been even more of an impressive feat. But all of that being said, I think a true marker of a proof that, Anthony, you took the suggestions from Ken and what we talked about in the first episode and put it into practice. Because Ken, one of the coolest things from, the Mr. Wiggins side was we had an entire assembly, an entire building with the exception of kindergartners that knew and was cheering on, Mr. Wiggins. And so that is just proof right there that, the substance and we talked about it. Ken, we had the chance to listen to the episode that we did. And there are some things that we'll talk about, initial thoughts, where have we, changed perspectives. One of the things that I am proudest of you is all of those items. I remember making a comment about Danielson rubric 4, which is, school environment. Mr. Wiggins ran recess duty, covered lunches, went to see kids that were not fourth graders and walked with them in the hallways, always was engaging in any conversation that had an opportunity to interact with a kid as well as with adults. And so it was one of those points I remember distinctively. I told him, it's okay to say no. You're not actually allowed to, but there's the thought of saying no is okay. If someone keeps on asking you to do something more and more and more. Unfortunately, in your current position, there is no real saying no. Just recognize when you have position, it is okay to send that boundaries. But with all of that being said, it was an incredible first day, in my opinion. Last year's group is definitely different than this group. And I won't say that it's, better, worse, different. They all have their own quirks that we are still trying to figure out. I think the fascinating thing, Ken, in the last episode, you talked about how, Anthony Wiggins came into a preset classroom that knew expectations that I had set up from, day 1 to day 90. And so from that point going forward, to watch that transformation of what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable, because what is acceptable in January is distinctively not what's acceptable, the first day, the third day, the seventh day, the first month of the school year.
Yeah. So speak to that, Anthony. What was the biggest shock? Maybe not shocker, but just, what did you pull away in terms of being a part of the establishment of routines and expectations? What did you learn from going through that with Matt that you didn't expect, or that you're going to say to yourself next year when you have your own first day of school? What are those important pieces for establishing clear expectations, solid routines, all of those capacities?
Based off my experience of last semester and this semester, it is very important. Just the first week, a little joke, like the honeymoon phase, like we're still in that honeymoon phase, so we're still figuring them out. But it is very important to establish a routine and procedures. And we don't have a lot of rules in the classroom. We have a couple simple rules that you follow them, I follow them, we do it together. And it was just different coming in, seeing how established it was in spring to the new set of students that we have now. So that was just the only difference in how you go about behavior management. So that was different.
I think one of the things that we've emphasized, Ken, and I think you would agree with this, is, black and white is very clear. You're either right or you're wrong. If you're right, you're in good shape. You have very little to worry about. If you're wrong, you're going to know that you're wrong immediately. And, how do we deliver it with care and, guidance to get back on the right side? But that, firmness, that consistency, that, the rules are not complex. Be a good human, whatever that looks like, is, if you have the choice, that fork in the road of, what the right choice is, and they've all identified that they know those right choices. If you stay in that path, you are going to have a seamless year in fourth grade. Otherwise, and Anthony, you can really talk about it, now. We're in this phase that over the next few weeks, those boundaries, how serious that line is going to be tested. And one day it's going to be by one kid, and 1 hour it's going to be by a different kid, and one moment it's going to be a totally different kid. That those are going to be, tested. So can you kind of talk about what you've witnessed? Now we're 4 weeks into the school year. What has that, we'll say, from the behavior management side, as well as kind of our expectations of kids, whether that's academic or behaviors?
Like you said, it's just on that straight path of being able to decide whether you're doing right or doing wrong. And if we ask you if that was smart of you to do, or is that helpful right now, and you acknowledge that, and it's not the right thing, and you fix it, that's it. Those are the only expectations that we should have of you. It is you knowing what's right and what's wrong, so we can continue to push forward, so we can establish your instruction and establish your learning, so it can become better for you. So it's just that, like you said, that straight and narrow of knowing right and wrong.
So we've talked a lot with guests over the time of the show, and very recently, it has seemed like about being explicit with kids. So being very open and honest as to what you're doing, why you're doing it, why you expect that. And I kind of see some of that coming out with your conversations about setting expectations and routines and being explicit in exactly what you're expecting from them and why. And so thinking about that and the way you've set up routines, how do you think being explicit with them has been beneficial, and what would you say to yourself next year when you are doing this again by yourself in terms of being the importance of being explicit? How open and honest are you with what and why you're doing it?
Very, very good question. And Matt is a great model of it. Every morning we have a morning routine and we go over the expectations of that day. We go over what we're going to do, why we're doing it, and we even talk about the day prior to it. Like we learned about dialogue the other day, so we talked about that a little bit in the morning meeting and incorporated into, well, we're going to do a little bit of writing today with that dialogue. So I just want you to understand that we're going to be looking at what we did yesterday, and it's going to help what we did today. Every morning we are very, very explicit, and I realized how to do that because I was watching Matt do it. And so it just becomes easier and easier to do and expect those expectations to happen. So I feel as though just being straight up with them, like even if you're having a rough morning, but hey, we're still gonna rock and roll through this, and we're gonna do what we need to do to be rock stars. So yeah.
I think it's one of the fun things that I've noticed, and one of the hard parts about a beginning of this school year is, trying to find your identity, what is able to be showed up front about your identity and your personality, and um, what are things that you may need to restrict. I love dressing up in costumes and causing a ruckus, but this group may not be able to handle that quite yet. A good marker that I think I told you before, I go into a lot of classrooms, whether it's my classroom or not, and I rile them up on purpose, and I see, can I pull them back pretty quickly. And last year's group, that was a great marker, and it was awesome for you to walk in because I could do literally anything. And with the matter of, a clap routine or, holding my hand up, whatever the case may be, within moments, they were all completely with me. And so we'll end up testing that. What's fun is I just leave the classroom every once in a while, and that's purposeful. Part of it is, I trust Mr. Wiggins at this point, his general instincts. I remember we talked about this in February. I already knew that your instincts were great. And that is what is the beautiful thing about you being built for education. You are an educator, in your heart and in your talents. What classroom that, gets to be blessed by your presence, will soon be seen, fortunately. All of that to say, those markers every once in a while is a really great way to see how good your teens are. Put them to the test and see which kids, take advantage. And that's a tightening up. It's not a be chaotic. So with that being the case, and I know we've talked quite a bit, I think you've had the chance to watch how I do things. And I, by no offense, will I take this answer by any means. What are some attributes going into when your name badge is outside a room that you say, Mr. Rogers sticks to a scripted curriculum too much, or, he uses the same class catchers or whatever the case may be. What are some attributes that you're like, I really want to steal this from my student teaching experience, and watching it, I think I could do something better. Again, no offense will be taken, but I'm sure you're kind of developing your own style, your own acknowledgement of what you want that to look like.
Yeah, I'm just going to encourage you to be honest, and because it'll be good for you, for Matt, for me, and for our listeners. And we already know he uses the same lame jokes too many times, so you don't have to mention that.
Appreciate it.
We'll do. I won't mention the dad jokes, but It's just I think your math instruction, because that's where I struggle with the most, and that's where I feel as though you really set in stone what you expect and what and how you go about it. Like, so when I watch you do it, I get my own little philosophy and how I want to do it in my own classroom one day. So your math instruction is what I really hone in on. So even in the classroom when Matt is teaching it, I'm one of the students. I will be going, like, when they start their schoolwork or their work that they need to complete. That's when I go around and start helping. But while Matt is doing his instruction, I'm paying attention too, so I can take what he's talking about and how he's doing it and give my own little, spin to it. So that is one thing I'm going to take, and that's one thing I feel as though you make it really good. So I don't really want to say I can make it better, but I can make it as good as Matt is portraying it in the classroom. So his math instruction, definitely.
So I want to tack on to that, because I remember in our conversation that was one of your things that you were most nervous about, and I assume, I feel like from our conversation, or maybe you just flat out said it, partly it was just because that was something you struggled with as a student yourself. So what is it about Matt's instruction, other than you being older and just more able to comprehend it than when you were 10, but what about his instruction do you feel has allowed you to be more confident with math that you think is also translating to his students being more confident with math? Like, with math, what specifically about the way he's approaching that?
So first off, his enthusiasm, because I never had that during my math class. It was always sort of monotone, but Matt is always enthusiastic, and with that enthusiasm, he puts real life situations in. So we're talking about, if we were talking about we're talking about place values, and he was making little jokes to the kids. Well, if I have 9,900 of these and you give me 9 of those, I don't want that. I don't want that trade. Do you see which number is bigger and why I want this number and not that one? He just connects it to real life situations, and they're like, well, you're right. I want more. He demonstrated that with just speaking it, and then he demonstrated with markers, and it was just awesome of how he was able to connect it to things they would understand. So kudos, seriously.
It's and to say, math instruction coming from your end where you're uncomfortable, it is a traditionally dry instructional area. Math instructors, when we think about that, no offense, hopefully, is one of those avenues that when you get handed a textbook, it is not against the rules to just go straight through problem by problem. And so part of the challenge, as we've mentioned in the past, is, making that come to life. What does that look like and what can that be? And all of that is turning it into a way that the kids can connect to it, or, the light bulb goes off. That being said, even though, and I remember this, we've talked about it many times, even though math is maybe not your area of most confidence, it is also probably the area that you in 2 to 3 years will be the very best at teaching. And it may not feel that way right now, but you think so critically about how you're going to teach it. You are, I don't want to say self-conscious, but you are so focused on how you deliver that instruction that is going to be set up meticulously. ELA, you've got it in the bag. Content, you can do that with your eyes closed type thing. Math is what's going to, you're hoping a supervisor doesn't walk in at the last minute, even if, you have, pre-solved every problem and created every slide and everything's ready to go. It's just discomfort. But what that ends up being, we talked about confidence. Your confidence doesn't need to be masked by any means. It is okay to be upfront. If I mess up a word, I've had a misspelled word that I found out, Ken. You ready what word this is? Are you ready? The word is fourth. Literally, the grade that I teach, there is a paper in the front of my room that I spelled it wrong because I was so focused on the rest that I was writing that I didn't even recognize it. What did I do? I made a huge scene of it in front of the kids. Oh, I made a mistake. Oh, well, this has been in front of you and no one's caught it for the last 2.5 weeks. Are you kidding? Oh my goodness, what was I thinking? I can shoulder that. That goes back to that previous conversation. I am, a person without dignity when I am clocking into my job. I am the butt of jokes. I am, the guy that will shoulder all the embarrassment, whether that's in my classroom, in my school, and that's kind of our responsibility too. If I can deflect shame or embarrassment or whatever the case may be, that ends up being a part of it. So you going up in an assembly in front of everyone communicates the risk taking that you're willing to do. You being transparent about not feeling super comfortable to teach math, but you're going to work through it together, immediately has a half of that classroom jump on board the Mr. Wiggins train of, I can relate to this guy. I can trust him because, we're working together. He is being honest with me. There's no games being played. And it makes the, oh, guys, I made the mistake even more, of an academic skill that we can kind of use. So with that being said,
he didn't answer the second part of the question.
All right, go ahead. Fine.
He didn't answer what he's going to.
What are things that you witness? And again, I will take zero offense by any means of what you said. What are things that you're like, man, I cannot stand? No, it's things that you distinctively do differently in your classroom.
I know it's not a big factor, or I don't want to say it's not a big, because we make it a fact. I try to make it a factor, but I feel as though during ELA, I personally love vocabulary, and I love writing. So I feel as though vocabulary and writing are definitely not ones that we try to tunnel vision. And I just feel as though that is definitely something I'm going to make a factor in my future classroom. It's just because I feel as though being able to speak and write and articulate anything that you want to in multiple ways is very important. And that's the type of ELA instruction I had. I was exposed to a bunch of words and I was exposed to a lot of writing. And I just think that kids and learners need that. So that is one thing I would definitely change a little bit in my classroom.
To clarify, and I'm not being defensive or defending, one of the challenging things is, to clarify, I hate writing. I absolutely despise writing, so I avoid it at all costs. I hate providing feedback. I hate, if I can have a conversation about a kid's writing, I would much rather than mark up a paper that I just struggle because I never received feedback that way. I know that's part of the job, so I have to do that, but that is the last thing I grade on the stack of things that we could be doing. The interesting thing is a lot of these decisions are often not even in our hands. Anthony and I were talking the other day about pacing. Pacing is challenging. And part of it is we all know as educators that the pacing that is said in the manuals are often in the ideal classroom. There is no movement of kids in and out. There is, all of the kids are open to the page that they're supposed to be on with a pencil sharpened. That is, a kid that's listening. So when they say a 20-minute lesson and it turns into 32, that's challenging. And so, for instance, this current curriculum is not a huge vocabulary based program. So what I've found beautiful and has enhanced my instruction is, what have you done? You felt comfortable to take that portion, that known weakness. See, I think that's a really big thing. That known weakness of the classroom, of the curriculum, and said, how can I prioritize it at a time that makes sense? And so we have, we are a Title I school, so we have Title I support come in. So we have what used to be, response to intervention, RTII, that's now identified as what I need. That is part of our rotation where kids go specifically before a lesson that they're going to have to use that vocabulary, and they do a rundown with Mr. Wiggins. When the kids are doing a writing activity, there are 4 or 5 kids all around, Anthony's desk, and he is bouncing like he is earning his paycheck that he doesn't actually get to cash in, but he is all over the place providing those supports. And so you can just see that enthusiasm come through. It's the idea of how do you, expand that to class wide as opposed to small group. Because at this point, I would consider you fantastic as small group. The beauty of what we're going to see through this placement is how do we continue to prioritize what we feel good and we can manage 4 to 5 kids and expand that to 17 to 20.
Or how do you structure the classroom to always set it up that you're working in those small groups more often?
That's a great,
if that's where you thrive as a teacher.
Yeah. And that's a great point. Ken, we talked about classroom styles, and I've been very upfront. My classroom style is not to have small groups. I feel uncomfortable having Anthony in there because it's requiring me to feel like I'm utilizing him. In the flip side, if he were to provide instruction, he probably feels, I'm speaking for you, an obligation to feel like I'm doing something as well. Not always, but I much prefer, my classroom is very much structured 20 minutes of core instruction, go do the work, and I'll circulate from there and then come back and identify how we were successful. And that model is what is represented in each of our subject areas. Now, it doesn't always work in that, flow, but you very clearly could have a station rotation model where, you have 7 kids and the 14 other kids know what they're doing. And, you create that explicit expectation of what they are doing at those certain times. There's timers, those type things. Now, Ken, I know that's more of what you kind of utilize as your classroom environment. Can you kind of speak to, why you felt like that matched your style, A, and B, what are some of the things this time of year you would be doing explicitly to make that something you could trust them on their own?
So I would say the reason that I gravitated towards that in every subject that I taught was I felt that's where students could learn best. I felt that I could group them based on simple data. I could have the students meet in groups that was going to allow me to provide more personalized instruction. So you're going to find when you approach skills in any subject, math, reading, and writing specifically, social studies and science is a little bit different because normally the kids don't know anything about what you're teaching because it's just new information to them. Whereas reading, writing, and math is building off of skills that they've learned in previous years. So Anthony, start to pay attention to when you're going through a lesson, observing students that clearly get it right away to the student that clearly has absolutely no clue what's going on and someone that falls in the middle. And what I found was by creating small groups and when I work with the students that have no foundation, whether they don't remember it, when they learned it, the foundational skill, they didn't understand it, whatever the case is, I can essentially provide the instruction that you're seeing from Matt or you're providing to the whole group. I can do it slower. I can provide them more time. And then when I meet with a group that kind of shows they understand it or they'll pick it up quickly, you might provide that same instruction, but you might do it a lot faster. Or you might jump right into practice, or you might jump right into review. So if it's some sort of reading skill, and let's say it's main idea, and they have an understanding of what main idea is, you can jump right into reading a paragraph and saying, okay, what's the main idea? How do you know? Whereas the first group, you're going to have to teach, this is what main idea means. This is how it's typically in the first sentence, or these are keywords that you're looking for. And then a group that already gets it, maybe you can do something a little bit more challenging. And again, you could have them independently read an article, identify the main idea, and when you meet with them, you're just reviewing right away. And so I found that small group was the way that I was able to deliver more personalized instruction, especially on the skills and units where I knew I was going to have a huge variety in terms of skill set. And whatever grade level you'll land in, you'll see that more and more. So right now you're just trying to figure out when are those opportunities in fourth grade. Next year, you can say, oh, I have a place value coming up. I bet I'm going to have kids that know all the place values up to, $1 million, and some that don't even know what the word place value means. Here's my opportunity to provide small group differentiated instruction. In terms of what you're doing with students, it's kind of the same as the first week of school, establishing routines. You have to establish expectations for what they're doing when they're not with you and when they are with you. My best advice for teachers that are trying small group instruction for the first time, whether it's station rotation or you're just pulling groups and they're working on stuff when they're not with you, is set up your classroom to operate in a small group model that you're going to use, and don't have a station for yourself. Don't have a small group lesson for yourself. Spend the entire class circulating, reinforcing positive behaviors, correcting inappropriate behaviors, setting the expectations for what's happening when they're not with you, and be explicit. Like I said earlier, say to the students, I am doing this because I need to trust you that you can work effectively when you're not with me. So when you are with me, I can provide you instruction that's just for you. So they know exactly why you're doing it, and they're a little bit more encouraged. Does it mean it's always going to be perfect? No, it's going to be the same as any other classroom. You have behaviors that you'll have to correct. Matt, it looks like you wanted to jump in.
Yeah. So Ken, have we ever really discussed the mass customized learning MCL that we do at our district? I can't remember if we've talked about it on an episode before.
We have here and there,
so
but you can clarify it.
One of the things that I find interesting, Anthony, I actually don't know if we've actually kind of talked about it, but our district adopted it because it was so small, this concept that kids would be moved along the path of mastery as opposed to the path of, grade level and age. So there were times that we were shifting groups every 12 days, every 24 days, every semester. We shifted kids not based off their grade level. So there was times that our schedule was lined up with the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th grade all essentially having the same core instruction. And part of that was the idea that, Ken, like you're saying, we could homogeneously group based off ability levels on a certain concept. So when we talk about it, I have a really high performing 3rd grader. I have on average 4th grader, a slightly lower 5th grader, and potentially a very, behind 6th grader on a certain concept, not in general, but, say we're doing that place value unit, all those students that are essentially scoring in that same range are in one classroom. And so the whole concept behind that is everyone is coming to you with the same base level understanding of a concept. And so what that ended up leading to is where I developed, my teaching style. It was lecture based and prove it because we didn't need to differentiate as much. Why didn't we have to differentiate as much? Because I knew that 3rd grader was as prepared as that 6th grader. I knew I might have to provide supports along the way, maturity wise for the 3rd grader and, prompting wise for the 5th and 6th grader. But the grade level really didn't matter anymore. It only mattered, how much you understood the instruction. And what we found, again, this is pre-pandemic, was, kids, when they were in charge of their own instruction, either got rid of that frustration or, got really motivated to make themselves as best as possible. And general motivation went up, performance went up, all these things went up. What have we done since the pandemic? Well, we went back to, grade level groupings where kids weren't allowed to, we were just thrilled that we were in the building, And so we can expand on it more tomorrow by all means. But what's really interesting is the reason why differentiation looks a little bit different is I've fallen in love with this concept that everyone essentially knows the same amount. And so I've delivered this instructional practice that I've made my style from what the majority of my regular ed teaching career was, which was, I've had third graders, I've had sixth graders working together on a daily basis on certain concepts based off, again, their performance and their understanding. So to give some clarification, in addition, have I done hybrid rotation like what Ken's talking about? Yes. But I just love, I choose, and I encourage you as you go throughout the semester, if you want to incorporate it, please incorporate it. That is by all means acceptable, because my classroom is a sandbox for you for trial. Try something out, see how it turns out. We'll process through it together. But with all of that, being there, one of the things that I wanted to talk about that I know we talked a little bit about at the beginning of this placement is your priorities as an educator. From your perspective, what are those challenges? What are those strengths? And I would imagine, I love to listen back to the episode, and hopefully, again, you take no offense, the depth of what we talked about of like the responsibilities of a teacher, you have a much bigger view of the many hats we wear as educators. So I guess what I would love to know is, over the last, semester plus, how has your view of being a teacher or education changed? And how has that, realistic experience prepared you better to go out on your own in just a few weeks, realistically?
So it was always hard in my college classes that all students are completely different and need different types of instruction. And I think really seeing that and understanding that that's just real. It's really true. All kids are completely different in how they take the instruction on. And I think that was like the biggest thing I've seen. It's just that kids take different steps and kids take different strides in getting further and further. So that was one expectation and one thing that really changed. And I do have a question. Sorry, I'm just going back to what Ken said about the rotation station. So, how do you get a proper like? What's the timeline on that? So when do you decide that this is what I'm going to do? Like, because you said you have to get data based off of how your students react, right? So, what does that timeline look like?
So the thing that you don't have the benefit of is experience in teaching your grade level. When you get to the second half of the year, you'll have a little bit, but there were so many other things that you were taking in that you wouldn't have really honed in on this. So what I would encourage you to do is tap into Matt and pick a subject. I would say start either with reading or math, possibly reading if you're a little bit more confident with that. Although the value of math being uncomfortable might be part of it too. But talk with Matt. What is a skill that he knows is coming up, that he knows you'll have this situation of you'll have students up here, down here, and then some in the middle where they should be. Because instruction is typically geared towards the kids in the middle where they should be. So start with that and then figure out what's a really simple way to assess them. And it can be, even for math, it can be multiple choice. So if it were fractions was a big one for me, adding fractions, kids would have understanding of how to add 3/5 plus 6/10. They would know to find common denominators and solve it. Others wouldn't even know like that you add the numerators and not the denominators. So I would do a couple problems. They would solve it on paper. They would get to a Google form and have multiple choice selections. And I've said this multiple times on the show, the last one was always, I don't know, because if they didn't see their answer, I wanted them to pick, I don't know. I didn't want them to guess, because if they guess right, I'm going to say, oh, wow, you know how to add fractions. And then 3 days later, when we're in the meat of it, they don't know how to add them. They've been grouped wrong, and now they're even less successful. So the reason I do multiple choice is it automatically grades, so I can very easily set up my groups. With a skill specific like that too, I would be very strategic with my answers. So again, if the problem was 3/5 plus 6/10, one of my answer choices would be 9/15, because that is going to be a student that thinks you add the numerator and add the denominators. So now when I group my students, not only am I grouping based on knowledge and lack of knowledge, I'm also grouping on the same misconceptions that tailored to that specific skill. So I have all the kids together that got 915, so I can hammer home on you don't add the denominators together, and they have to be the same. So, like being really strategic with that. So Matt is going to be your best resource because he could tell us right now, this skill, we got this huge range. This skill, we have this huge range. So your timeline, to answer your question, look to that in the future. Then a couple days before, come up with a really simple assessment that's going to group those kids. Now, when it comes to the rotation model, station rotation is great. My only issue with it is it's very restrictive. In theory and in practice, in order for station rotation to work, and I talked about this in my keynote at Northern Lehigh recently, you have to come up with a 12 to 15 minute mini lesson. Your other activities have to take, if you're going to do 15-minute rotations, those other activities need to take between 14 and 16 minutes for the kids. Because if it's too long, they don't get to finish it. If it's too short, now you have to have something else for them to turn to. They're twiddling their thumbs. That's where behaviors become a problem. My other issue with it is you're going to feel pressured. You're going to be looking at the clock. You're going to be watching your timer. Oh my God, it's 13 minutes. I only have 2 minutes left and I'm not ready to rotate.
Midway through. Yeah.
A phone call goes off. All these things make it stressful. So as I progressed more and more with using small group, I moved away from stations almost exclusively. And it was, I call your group, you come to me, we work. When you're not working with me, you just have a task list. And those are essentially your stations, but they just do them in the order you want, or they can do any order. It depends on what those activities are. And so now it allows me to really cater that instruction. When I'm meeting with my lower group, they're probably going to need me for like 20 minutes. And when I get to the group that kind of just needs to practice because they had a basic understanding, they need a little introduction mini lesson, maybe I only need 13 minutes with them. When I get to my enrichment group, maybe they only need 5, or maybe I'm going to spend 18 minutes with them because I can really challenge them or I can extend it for them. So it allows you to just operate more freely. So specifically to answer your question, the timeline is look ahead to that unit, identify that skill, and then assess it a couple days before, and then know how you're gonna group your students. And research will say between 5 and 7 is the most ideal group. And I like to say that is written by a person who's never taught a class of 30 kids. The ideal group is you saying these 6 kids need help because of this reason. These 15 kids need help for this reason. And these 2 kids need to be enriched. That is more effective than saying I have to have 5 to 7 exactly, even if they're not going to fit exactly what the kids are grouped with.
Ken, can you kind of speak to, I know, Anthony, you've been, lucky. We've had 2 adults between you and I that are competent to run groups at all times. The variable right now, we have a plethora of adults in our room, and we are searching for ways to use, because we're used to running groups of 8, 9, 10 at a time when we are doing a group-based rotation. So Ken, can you kind of speak to what you would do in the situation of having another adult in the room, not having an adult, as well as having an adult that may be pulled very frequently?
So just whether or not Anthony should be utilizing you?
Well, I'm just thinking like a conversation. He doesn't have much experience because the 2 of us are always in the room. I am always involved in the instruction, and eventually I'm going to become less and less. And there are, when you are doing your pure lesson, I stay to the side, I write you notes when I feel like that's necessary. We reflect on those type things. But predominantly, whenever we would shift to a group-based activity or a circulation-based activity, I'm not exiting the room. I'm pulling some kids to me. It cuts that group in half. So just that management of the room from the perspective that either you are the only resource, you are inconsistently able to count on support, and you have a ton of support. Those three variables are really difficult to kind of prepare for in rotations, which are heavy preparation based. If you're going to do that, you need to kind of, know the curriculum that you're heading towards. You kind of have to have the worksheets or the problems or those type. It's not a off the top of your head type scenario, which is, again, preparing for all the possible scenarios.
Right. So I would encourage you to do both. So, just like when Anthony has to take the stage and teach, the full lesson, the full day, and you're truly going to stand to the side, Matt, do the same with when you're trying small group. Say Matt can't be there to manage behavior of the kids not with you, and he's not going to run groups. But then also mix in opportunities where you think of Matt more as a TA, because you will, depending on where you teach and what grade you teach, you will have times where you do have a non-teacher adult in your room that you absolutely should utilize for your small group. And the difference there is you have to say to Matt, when you work with these three students, I want you to do this. So you have to be very explicit with him, not thinking of him as a master of the content, thinking of him as someone that's there to support the students. Because if you do have a TA that's consistently in for that one subject or that 3 days out of the 5-day cycle, those situations, you absolutely want to leverage that second adult for more than just managing the student's behavior. And that comes from saying, I just want you to practice these three problems with this group of students on this rotation, those type things. So I would say set yourself up to prepare for both situations. What other questions do you have for us? I like that you're asking questions because that makes sense.
That was pretty much the one that really stuck with me about how to go about that type of enrichment and instruction. But yeah, thank you it makes a lot of sense.
Let me add something that we've been talking quite a bit, and maybe we can kind of talk through it as a group. The classroom management is so much beyond just behaviors. And we've been talking kind of, originally we talked about, the manuals in front of the face, and then you have this, band of kids that you're able to, witness because you've stepped a little bit further away, and you have, the amphitheater you see, but, the kids on the wings are just not in that peripherals yet that you're acknowledging and changing and what have you. So that has been a huge improvement of, Mr. Wiggins is touching base with all of the kids and, rotating through and checking base and correcting when needed. So the next question that I have, Ken, is, the dynamics of a class are a big thing. The dynamics of, puppet string, when do I push, when do I pull, when do I let go, is such a dynamic decision making. We've got kids that if I press in the wrong way will totally ruin the rest of my day. They will lose trust in me, and I've lost it until the end of the day, and who knows how that's referenced. And that may be, blowing up, or it may be in complete isolation. So we've been really talking about those. I remember the first day of school of student teaching, Anthony, you said, hey, I know we're not allowed to smile until, Thanksgiving type thing, which is the classic thing we say. And I said, that's not going to fly here because, relationships are too important. And what you're witnessing right now is I'm giving a lot of slack to some kids that I'm not giving to others based off what I feel like is the right decision in that moment, in that situation, what I need them to do. What am I, picking? Today it was kids were on the carpet and they weren't really working, but it's 4 minutes before we transition to special. Is that worth correcting? So if we could just take some time to get your, input of so much of being the teacher is processing and mentally playing through what would happen if I reacted in this way, even though what do I want to do? I want to be that consistency that we talked about. Sometimes you have to give that up, especially at this time of the year.
Anthony, can you, not, I have an answer to that, but I want Anthony to add to that question first. So in relation to that, Anthony, with adjusting to classroom management, being consistent, um, what would you add to that you're wondering or you're observing, and then I'll answer it.
Well, it's been difficult for me because, like with last year's group, it was easy to get them back on track, and with this group, it's complete. It's just different, not good or bad. It's just different in the sense of, well, we're not getting them back as quickly as we thought we would, and so I think how we should, like, me and Matt talked about that 4 minutes, and like he was like, should I say something? I'm like, I don't think so. It's 4 minutes left. I mean, we're about to transition to another subject, so I just feel as though it's hard to like have to figure out when I need to do that and when I can't, because Matt does a really good job of not doing it when I feel as though it should be done. And that's just experience. Like, that's him having 14 and me still learning how to do it. So that's, yeah.
I think, in my opinion, and this is just me as another person that taught in a classroom, and Matt and you have both talked about, consistency is so important. Students need to know when they are over the line and when they're not. Our first or our second guest, Rhett Oldham, one of the quotes that always sticks out to me is, students do not like when a teacher is ambiguous. When it's gray on what's wrong and what's right, it's really hard for them to be successful. Even if your black and white line is, you're a really forgiving teacher, but that line is obvious, or you're a really strict teacher and that line is obvious, students are going to be more successful in that environment because they know where the line is. But the reality is when you're working individually with students, you have to have different expectations for different students. You have to understand what their home life is like, what their personalities are like, what they struggle with and what they don't struggle with. And so it all fits under the expectations that you have as a class, but being realistic with what students are capable of doing. So it's the same as content. You have a standard that all students have to strive to achieve, but you have to scaffold towards that for certain students. And so behaviors are the same way. So when you're working independently in a classroom, the expectation is that you're focused on your work, and maybe there's no conversations, or the only conversations should be related to content. Well, especially in my classroom environment, students were working independently a lot because I was doing small group a lot, and I let them sit wherever they wanted. I didn't direct it at all until they got to a point where they couldn't handle it. And with fifth graders, it was more typically the boys that could not control themselves to stop talking to their friends. And so it was me pulling them aside and pointing this out and saying, when you sit next to your friends, all you do is talk. I don't want you to be less social. You're probably going to be a killer salesman one day because you have such a great personality. You can't sit next to your friend. All you're going to do is talk. So you need to sit over here. They would sit, in a designated spot for a day or two, and then I would let them choose again. And some kids, that was all they needed. Others, they would gravitate back to their friends. A week later, they would start doing it all over again, and they needed to have it pointed out again. And other students could sit next to their friends and not talk at all. I didn't care. It was, the expectation was you were focused on your work, but it was the flexibility of the student was the reality of how they interacted with people around them or didn't interact with people around them. So I think it's really important as you get to know your students. I think that's where the flexibility in classroom management comes in. Beginning of the year, you don't really know them. So you set clear expectations. As the year goes on, you start to get to know your students, and you can say, okay, like, this student really struggles socially in this way. This student really struggles socially in this way. How can I better support them to work themselves back to what the expectation is for everyone? And so I would say expectations stay consistent, but the path to achieving those expectations are going to be wildly different student to student. Does that make sense?
So one of the things, ironically, Anthony, today we were reading a story, biography about Lin-Manuel Miranda as part of a comprehension group. And in Hamilton, he talks about the main character, Hamilton. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the show, but he meets with the representatives from the South. He's representing the North, and he's meeting with representatives of the South, and say they are in the room where it happens. Then they come to a deal, and what that deal ends up being is that Alexander Hamilton gives up absolutely nothing of importance. All he does is he gives up that the United States Capitol will be in Washington, D.C., which is much closer to the southern states. The representatives from the South are thrilled, and in exchange, the Southerners sign off on the okay of the rules and the beliefs and the Constitution. What really matters still happened. And what did he give up? Something that really doesn't matter at all. Okay, where is it located? And it's just ironic, we're talking about that today. And really that's teaching. What doesn't matter that you can concede. Is that a place in the classroom? Is it who you're sitting with? Is it minimizing the number of questions? Is it, they're marking up grammar and they're marking it on the pre-written and they don't have to rewrite the whole sentence. All I care is, do they know what needs to be there? What can you concede that doesn't take anything away from the end task? But still, essentially they're completing the same thing. And it's unbelievable. The moment that they are acknowledged that they did it right in that conceding, you didn't do as much, they're fine just finishing out the rest of it. If they know they're going to be right, 9 times out of 10, they'll just do the full work, even if that's not what you're asking. Ken, the one thing that I want to kind of talk about, I was thinking about this as we were listening to the episode. I had this kind of metaphor, and I'd love for you to kind of talk with us, as a collaborative group, when it comes to a college athlete. A college athlete is getting ready to go pro, and they spend all of this time focusing on their pro day, the combine, draft night. And the moment after that person is drafted, they are a professional. The pick in the draft doesn't matter. It's are you playing on that team? Are you not? Are you contributing? Are you not? And one of the things I've been thinking about quite a bit is, Anthony, you are, weeks away from walking across a stage with your name on a diploma and in the state of Pennsylvania, the clearance to be a teacher. And so much of your, university focus is what does it take to get to that point? But a lot of us, forget that after that day of graduation, you want to get paid to be a teacher. What is lining up, and what are some of those future thoughts? And Anthony, you are welcome to chime in as well as Ken. I can give my own opinion to mix that balance of, get through all the things you need to, which I think you can't wait to be done, those parts of things, and the freedom of when would you be looking for a job? What would you be prioritizing? And, this conversation of making, the Mr. Wiggins classroom environment come to life as soon as possible. So I'm going to lean to Ken first. If you have any thoughts or additional questions, I'd love to hear your perspective, Anthony, because I know in your brain, you're like, I need to get this reflection done. I need to get this lesson plan submitted. I need to have my binder done. None of that matters, the day after graduation.
Well, before I answer that, I would actually like to turn to Anthony, and just because I think this is a good conversation that we haven't had on our show, is what questions you have about when it comes time to applying, interviewing, going through that process. What questions do you have for us as people that have gone through it and also like sat in interview committees?
So I don't know anything about it. We were supposed to have a certification meeting last night, but there was curriculum night that I was blessed to be able to be a part of, and I had a great time being a part of. But there was a certification meeting that was going to express that for all of us and answer all of our questions, which being how do I get a job? That was pretty much my big question throughout the entire thing. Yes, I know I'm going to walk across the stage. I'm going to get my cert. I'm going to get my diploma. What do I do after that? Like, what? Yeah, I know I need to put my resume out there and put everything I need, but what is going to make me look different from the resume sitting to the left or the right of mine? So, does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple things. One is I don't know what it's like right now, but anticipate your certification not being the moment you graduate. It took time, at least when I graduated, and I still would imagine it's pretty much the same, with, especially when it comes to the logistics of government operations moving quickly. So be prepared. My first recommendation is look at the substitute services around your area. I don't know if you guys use like a subservice that services multiple districts or that kind. Make sure you are ready to sub the day you graduate. I'm proud to say that I subbed in a classroom 3 days after I graduated because all you need is your bachelor's. So get that set up so you get into classrooms right away. And so that's piece number one. So that's just to get started. But once you are certified, once you're ready to start applying, start to research districts that you're interested in, areas that you're interested in. Where do those applications live? You know, in Pennsylvania, we have a website called PA REAP, which is where a lot of districts can post. A lot of districts, at least in my area, do not really post to there. They have their own listings on their own district employment page. So really just start a list of every district in the area that you're willing to search and, the geographic distance you're willing to go. Just have a chart. Is it on their website or is it on PA REAP? Can I set up to get notifications, or should I be coming on this website every Friday to be looking for openings? So that's just another thing to help you catch it all.
I'll just add,
in terms of
in Central PA, we use PA Educator, not PA REAP. So PA,
right,
PA
exactly.
REAP ends up being towards Pottstown and the Philadelphia area. And so you may end up, it's the same application, it's the same essential program, but it's almost like a teacher's version of LinkedIn where, a school district can see your profile. A lot of times what they'll do is you may go, as Ken's saying, hey, there's an opening, you may directly apply, and they might say, hey, make sure to also send us your profile through this, teacher profile LinkedIn equivalent.
Right. So knowing that, and obviously we're talking specific to Pennsylvania right now, but wherever our listeners are listening, it's the same concept. The geographic area that you're willing to move to, live to, commute to, know exactly where those applications live. I had no idea about that in Central PA. So if I was looking there, that would be a problem. When it comes to your resume, I would highly recommend that you ask your principal at your school right now to look at your resume, schedule a meeting, have a resume built. Use Matt, use a couple other colleagues, maybe in the district that have recently applied, or, no offense to Matt, but he might not be a great resource for your resume because he hasn't applied for a job in 14 years. And he hasn't really been a part of like committees evaluating resumes, compared to me. And you absolutely can use me as a resource. I've recently applied to multiple positions because I've changed positions, as well as been a part of evaluation committees. So find teacher resources, professional resources to help you before you go to the principal, just so it looks a little bit better when you get to the principal and they're, saying like, oh, this is great, but maybe you flip these two things or you change this or that. Not that they're your first person you go to. Talk to teachers that have recently applied and ask them, can you remember any questions you were asked? Questions are pretty traditional in what's asked. Maybe the principal would be willing to share some questions with you. There's nothing wrong with asking. Get those questions down and start prepping your answers. Prep your answers and then practice. You won't sound rehearsed, you'll sound prepared. So know exactly, if differentiation comes up, I want to talk about this, 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 and this. If a reading lesson comes up, I want to talk about this, 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 and this. So that regardless of how the question is asked, you have this like Rolodex of like things you want to hit. And when you interview, you talk about, as a teacher, I did this, because you are a teacher now. You've already done it. As a teacher, I did this. When I have my own classroom, I will do this. Don't say, if I was a teacher. You are a teacher, and you need to project yourself that way from the get-go. When it comes to applying, you follow the traditional models. I think it's still acceptable nowadays. Don't be afraid to show up to the school and drop your resume off in person. Throw on your suit, greet the secretary very nicely. You're a very warm and personable person. Your personality is great. So that's going to be a benefit. Just go in and say, is the principal available? I would love to drop my resume off for this position that I've already applied to online. They might say no, but feel free to leave it. That secretary, if you do anything to catch their attention, they're going to tell the principal. And at the very least, he or she just glances at it and pulls yours out of the hundreds that they're getting through this online application. So, put in that time. And circling back to the subbing, I know I'm going on here, but circling back to the subbing, that's a foot in the door. I earned myself multiple interviews because of being a daily substitute. I was a daily sub for a year, and not where I actually landed, but I did earn multiple interviews for shorter, long-term sub positions because of being a presence in the school and being a sub and bringing my A game. So, I think there's a lot that you can do to really set yourself up for success and being prepared and leaning on resources that you have around you.
So I think, Ken, you're bringing some really good points up. So a few things that I just want to add, our intention is to get in front of people that matter, in our district, to welcome the principal into our classroom to see you teach, to welcome director of curriculum, to welcome student services, to welcome the superintendent. They may not have time to come, but the fact that you are willing to have them, and what's beautiful about it is they know your name. Like, these people of high importance know your name, and they go to, conferences like we do with superintendents and directors of curriculum from across the county and across the area, that they say, we don't have a spot, that there's a dynamite person in this position, which is fantastic. Another thing Ken mentioned about the questions in interviews, again, they may be different. The questions I got, I think our superintendent said, these are the standard questions that you probably have heard before. They have no fear of asking those standard questions because they don't much care about the answer. All they're really trying to identify is, were you prepared? And B, what is your personality? If they hear the same stale answer, not that it's wrong or right, but if it is the same, generic answer that doesn't represent Mr. Wiggins' classroom, obviously if you're saying, oh, assessments don't matter and behaviors, that's fine, no big deal. But if it's in that general vicinity of correct, but with a flair of you, that goes so much further. And that's kind of why it's standardized. The last thing I will say, unfortunately for you, because you do have quite a bit to do from university requirements, is get as much of that done as early as you can, so that the back end of your placement, unfortunately for my sake, if you have to take off to go get an interview, if you need to take, some time to field phone calls, like, that is what it should be. Really, that comes down to, there's no question you've earned your certification going into week 12 of a 15-week placement. So, but I would say, those things that Ken's saying is the real big key. And for anyone listening, if you're entering the educational field, all you're looking for is a leg up, because you're probably graduating with a couple hundred other, teachers. And not to pull Gabby in, but your girlfriend, walked into a fantastic situation. She walked in the same situation I did, got a contracted position because she's a dynamite teacher from student teaching. She didn't have to apply to a single school. I hope that that's the case for you as well. But if it's not, you just put a little legwork, and if you get it done ahead of time, that is a huge jump start, opposed to a lot of people that are going to be scratching their heads the day after graduation saying, well, I'm ready, I think. And they really don't have the preparation.
Worst case scenario, I'm sure there's something that you could easily find on Matt to get him fired, and then you got an open position for
Wrong
yourself.
answer, Ken. Wrong suggestion.
So before we jump into our exit ticket, I want to hear from you, Anthony. What are you hoping to accomplish with the remainder of your student teaching? What specifically is something instructionally that you want to work on, or philosophy in terms of the way you're managing the classroom? Just specifically, what do you really want to hone in and focus on with your last 8 or 9 weeks?
So I really want to focus on letting it be my classroom. So I'm like Matt said, I'm trying to get all my Millersville requirements out of the back of my head, so I can focus on making that classroom that I'm in for the remaining weeks my classroom. Like you said, I want to make Matt my assistant, and to the point where he's coming in and I'm letting him know this is what we're doing today. For morning meeting, can you do this? And that's my next big step as a teacher, is being able to let that be my classroom. And for that, however remaining weeks, all those teachers in that building and administrating and all the students know that Mr. Rogers is here, but this is Mr. Wiggins' classroom. So that is definitely something I want to happen before this is concluded.
I will say, just a funny anecdote. My favorite thing, my all-time favorite thing of watching you teach, because it's grown exponentially, and we've mentioned you're super receptive to feedback. My favorite thing, Ken, is Anthony will be teaching a lesson, and all of a sudden he'll pause at the end of what he thinks is supposed to be the pause, and he'll look at me in fear for a half a second, and all it is a head nod or a smile or a thumbs up, and he's right back into it. We talked in the last episode, confidence is a huge thing, and that answer exudes confidence. That shows growth right there. If you put this episode right next to the other one, you are a totally different, more professional representation. You're a teacher. You've entered the field of teaching. Unfortunately, you get a few more weeks until you get paid for it, but you have already established yourself as a presence. Mr. Wiggins is a entity. That is a place to be. That is a place where kids thrive. And so I'm just looking forward to how the next few weeks continue to represent that as you take more of those reins of that classroom.
Yeah, I agree. That definitely exuded confidence that I didn't see previously, which is a good thing. It's the progression you should be making, and I think that was the perfect answer. That's what you need to do. You need to make it yours, and you need to feel as though you don't need to lean on Matt, and you also need to feel as though you can make mistakes and hopefully see it yourself or have it pointed out to yourself afterwards, and then you learn from that. So it's not gonna. I like to always say to new teachers, no matter how bad a lesson is, you're not going to break the kids because you delivered a bad lesson. You're going to break the kids if you don't form relationships with them, which is the opposite of what you're doing. So don't be afraid to have a really crappy lesson. It won't matter. They won't remember, or they'll remember and they'll think it's funny. And that's fine too. So I want to jump into, I don't want to cut this conversation off at all, but I do want to jump into our exit ticket. So these are the same 4 questions that we asked you, Anthony. We modified them when we had you on first time, so they're not our exact typical exit ticket questions, but they're a little bit modified. So it'll be cool to listen back to your first episode and then listen to these answers now. So question number 1, what is the best thing a teacher can do to make a student's school experience better?
Answer is definitely not going to change for this one ever. Just because I feel as though it's beneficial. It's making it connect to their life and making it, why are we doing this? This is why we're doing it, and having a correlation to some aspect of their personality, their home life, their outside life, even their sporting life. Whatever they do, is just making it connect to them. And I feel as though putting them first and considering them, and that I'm doing this for them, is the biggest. My answer is never going to change on that.
I love that consist. I mean, you phrase it, more articulately this time. Not that you didn't last time, but it just shows your core values are in the right place for what you're doing, which is just fantastic. Now, when we talked about best advice that you'd receive, it could have been colleague, supervisor, but I kind of want to challenge you, and it can't be from me. Last time you talked about a coaching situation of making every moment count. I want you to think about something you've received that stuck with you from the beginning of your placement that kind of guides you as you go into each day and each opportunity to teach.
I can't use you. That's hard.
All right, I'll allow you to use me as long as Ken's okay with it. I'm okay with it.
I'm with you. Like, this experience has been the most eye-opening experience. So everything that you or Emily or anyone is saying to me in this time, I'm taking it in, and it's what we instructing. Are they understanding it? Like, forget about all the extracurricular. Does my object? We talked about it today. Does my objective match my assessment to the end? So is what I needed them, or what they needed to learn? Did they learn it? Because if they didn't, we need to go back over it, and something needs to change. And if they did, good. So I think it is what you say is, did they take anything away from this lesson? And if they did, great. And if they didn't, work harder. So
yeah, I think that's the beauty of it, Ken, and I know, not that we're supposed to interrupt right now, but that's your contract. You start with an essential question to a lesson, and the assessment proves, did you accomplish that assessment, the essential question? And that is the marker of good teaching, is if you delivered what you claimed you were going to do when you started that lesson. So good answer. I like it. So with that being the case, we talk about classroom management, and last time we talked about how naturally we deal with things as a reactive situation. What are some of the things that you have considered, or ways that you want to be proactive to avoid behaviors getting out of control or getting to be a problem in your classroom?
So I know it might sound easier said than done, but it's just making the accountability fall back on the students, right? And having those expectations being met. So I think having that expectation of what I want in the classroom and how I want it ran is pretty much it. And for it to not happen, just giving them what they need to know. Like, this is not okay, or this is not going to work.
Perfect.
Clear
Last
as could
one.
be.
If your students were asked to describe Mr. Wiggins in 3 words, what would you hope they say?
So definitely comedic. So they were always getting a laugh out somewhere. Whenever I can be silly, I like to be silly. And they always want to fist pound me or try to give me a high five and move it away. And we're always cracking jokes. So definitely being like a comic to them and making everything seem, all stress levels go down. Um, Definitely trustworthy. I've seen a big shift in trust from the beginning of the school year, even in 4 weeks now. And that even ties in with behavior management. Like, how I went about going about behavior management in week 1 is completely different about how I'm doing it now, because I've established that trust with all of my students. And the last one is just, flexible. I think they would call me flexible. Uh, they had it's like that idea of having like a squirrel brain, where your brain's just going a mile a minute. Where it comes back to those instincts where it's like, okay, yeah, chalk that. We're not going to do it. We'll just do something else that will still incorporate what we need to do, but we're going to get rid of that. So definitely flexible. So comedic, we're trustworthy and flexible, definitely.
Ken, can I share? I was super excited about this episode because I knew after your answers last time that this would prove your growth. Now, if you go back and listen to the first episode, your 3 characteristics were completely based on you as the teacher. And what we just heard was you as the instructor and what you are to the kids. You are trustworthy to the kids. You are, comedic to drop. The reason why you chose comedic was because you knew being silly and fun and, personable brings their level of comfort up. And those aspects, yeah. And so what you're sharing right now has been that perfect shift of, I come into the classroom to stand on the stage and teach. That's what I thought. That I was excited for everyone to be forced to pay attention to me. And that's almost what your answers reflect last time. You said courageous. I don't know if you remember, but you said courageous, that they would feel that you were being courageous to be in this position, which is not a wrong answer. But your answers now represent, the possibilities and the comfort and the care that the kids feel because they get to be in an environment that matches what they need. So really, I think more than anything, that proves the growth of this journey of, unfortunately, what we think the classroom is going to be, what our role is going to be, into what it really ends up being. And your 3 words just matched what, the best thing that you just said. That first question is echoed through those 3 words, which is very, very cool. To wrap up our questions, I will share. I don't know about you. We had talked about creating a Twitter account. We created a Twitter account. I think we used it maybe 3 or 4 times. But do you happen to know what your Twitter account is? And do you promise to Ken, so he doesn't yell at me by the time we get to the end of the episode, that we will build our PLN a little bit more, so that you can be more connected and, we build that teacher community beyond Ken and myself?
Yeah, absolutely. So my Twitter is Mr. Wiggins edu. I actually go on it every day and I just scroll. It's a bunch of educational philosophies, which is really interesting to read. And what's even funnier is educational memes that I feel as though only educators will get. So, which is really fun.
That's fantastic. I'm thrilled. We haven't talked about it since the episode. It, hasn't been a priority, but I'm glad that you have a place, and it can be a showcase of the good and the bad and the questions and the challenges and connections you need. That's what Ken and I use our platforms for as well. So kudos to you. You gave kudos to me, but kudos to you. And I'm sure Ken will echo this. It is truly a pleasure to watch this growth. And it's tough. Ken, we talked about, not having control of our classroom. It is brutally tough to witness, someone take over your space. And to be honest, at first, I struggled mightily. I realized how much I love teaching, having to give it up. And I'm finally coming around of not being jealous of you having such a prominent role and recognizing that you're doing a heck of a job and just really setting up to make a unbelievable difference for the next 35 plus years in a lot of kids' lives. So we have a few more weeks together, and we'll check in towards the end of the progress report. Hopefully, we may have a contract in hand at that point, or something lined up pretty good. So, but we gotta get those hurdles done so we can start looking up to bigger and brighter things.
Absolutely. Yeah. It really has been a pleasure to have you back on, Anthony. Just seeing your growth, the depth of your answers. And like Matt said, Matt, you pointed that out perfectly. Just his 3 words being about the kids, not about himself, shows that maturity and growth. So I wish you the best of luck. Enjoy your time that you have with Matt. Really put yourself out there, and good luck as you take the next steps. Use me as a resource. Seriously, you can reach out to me for anything that you need. I can offer a little bit of a different perspective than Matt in a positive way, just because we have different paths and different experiences. Whether it's prepping for an interview, looking at your resume, you have your first job and you're struggling, your PLN is a resource for you, and we're all here to support each other. And so I will do anything to support you at any time that you need. And that really goes for any teachers that I work with. So thanks again for coming back, Anthony. Everything that we talked about, as well as his Twitter handle, will be linked on our show notes page, which can be found at powereduup.com/show89. You can find me on social media at Ken Ehrman. You can find Matt at EdTechNeighbor, and you can find our podcast at Power EDU Up as well. So thanks again for joining us, Anthony. And Matt, why don't you close us on down here?
All right, as we power down this episode, Anthony, like you did before, you left us feeling powered up. Everyone stay well, and we look forward to getting to talk to you next week.
Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. If you haven't already, please subscribe on whichever platform you're listening to or watching us on YouTube. Each week, we get to talk to amazing educators who are making a positive impact on the lives of students, their colleagues, administrators, and education as a whole. It's been such a privilege every week to be able to talk to these incredible individuals, learn from them, grow with them, and better myself and all of education through these conversations. If you haven't already, please consider sharing this with a colleague, someone who can benefit and be powered up from the experience of listening to these incredible conversations. Because of Powered Up, we are powering education by empowering you.